This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders. Today I'm honored to have Dominic Dithurbide on the show. He is leading the marketing team over at MotionPoint. So we're going to talk about MotionPoint, which is a translation company. They do have software that helps translate websites and things like that. So we're going to talk about that. They also use AI for some of that. So there's going to be some conversations in that path as well. But anyway, with all that being said, Dominic, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John, for having me. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, man. If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you got into doing what you're doing, and what is it that MotionPoint actually does?
Yeah, well, a little bit of my background. So born and raised in Mexico City, and just as a young buck, knew I loved the beach. And I had my eyes set on South Florida for college. So I went to a school called Lynn University here in Boca Raton. And once I got there, I started an internship program with MotionPoint. So not American, don't have the papers, the green cards and all that, but have been doing it, I guess the hard legal way, right? The step-by-step iterating into my career. It has been my dream to be an American citizen, to work in the States, like, millions of people, maybe even billions of people all over the world. And been blessed with the opportunity that MotionPoint gave me early on in my career to be an intern there, and the universe just had it in its plans to extend my internship a couple times, which led to my responsibilities growing, and I could finally stick around in the marketing team. Once that happened, the company sponsored me, which meant that they were able to get my H-1B visa, and not sure how familiar your listeners are to that, but there's a little bit of luck and chance involved. It's a lottery. And from there, I was able to kind of, you would say, win the lottery. I would absolutely compare it to that, and get approved for that visa, which led me to grow here as a marketing manager from an intern. And then the company went through a couple of acquisitions, well, one acquisition, one sale, and then our private equity company that came in, started really understanding the landscape of the translation industry, how the website and website translation fit into that, what MotionPoint did. They were fascinated by it. And we hired a CEO called Evan Kramer. Evan is just, the Tom Brady of CEOs right now, I'd say. He comes in, he disrupts a little bit in a very high honor type of form, generating, new sources of revenue through mergers and acquisitions, and really propping up companies to be more than they thought they could be. And in him, he saw a leader that could step up to the role. As a matter of fact, we actually hired a VP of marketing that I was going to report to. She, in the last minute, defaulted. Kudos to her. She said, I want to spend more time with my kids, my family. She had just had a couple of, kids. One was 1 year old, the other was 3. And she, was very apologetic to us because she had already accepted the offer. She was about to start. And then a week before, she fell through. And by then I had been working with Evan for around 4 months, trying to find this candidate and still running the marketing team. And honestly, he's done a lot for my career. He kind of trusted me at that point. He said, I'm not going to look for another vice president of marketing. I'm going to go with Dominic. And from there, he's actually a CMO, VP of marketing, CEO. That's where he's come from. Some people come from engineering or sales or product, and Evan is a marketer. So that's where he came from. He split the marketing department away from sales, and now we're our own thing. Allowed me to hire, four great professionals that I have the privilege to serve as their leader. And Now I'm the director there, director of marketing, and still, trying to do my thing to stay in the country, extending my visas, and I owe all of that to MotionPoint. So that's a little bit of my background. Born and raised in Mexico, but love the USA as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great background, and it's kind of cool how you were able to stay in there. I know I probably one of my favorite employees that I worked with is a guy named Domingo, and he had to kind of go through something very similar coming from the Dominican Republic to get his to basically win that lottery and get his visa approved, and then he has since become a citizen, which is a pretty awesome story. And it's right.
You guys miss with him. It's tough, right? It's not so easy, and we want it so much. We do it the right way. I always say it's way too easy to do it the illegal way, and way too hard to do it the right way. There has to be some mediation there. But
yeah, there needs to be some middle ground for sure. Because it seems like I don't want to get too much into the political thing, but there's a lot of work that has to go into something that seems so obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. People care. They're working. They're good citizens. They pay the taxes. They're generating revenue. They're doing what we're all kind of asked to do in this wonderful place and in this wonderful country. So I understand what you're saying. It's sometimes it's a little hard to prove something that's very obvious to all the people that you touch and you work for. If you're someone that's really dedicated to the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've been at MotionPoint for a while, for about 7 years now. What have you seen change when it comes to the technology and even some of the reasons behind translation services and how companies are using that today?
Yeah, well, when I first came to MotionPoint, I'm passionate about language. I studied marketing, but I also double majored in journalism, and I always was a writer. And as a writer, I loved different languages. I loved writing. I know Spanish. I went to learn a little bit of French, and I thought, well, MotionPoint, the translation company, they probably have a lot of global customers, right? And one of the things that I learned real quick that was fascinating to me about the industry is they call it globaloney. And you can look out that term. It's almost like baloney combined with globalization, and it's the theory of the world is not as global as you might think it is, right? And look at your Facebook friends. How many are from another country, right? Even if you're from the Dominican Republic, probably most of your friends are from there. And if you live there, even more so, 1-2% might be from somewhere else. And you start looking at a bunch of numbers like that, and you realize, wow, globalization is maybe not as big as people might think it is, although it is very, very big, in many other ways, especially in the economy. So what I was very surprised to learn is that MotionPoint, for example, most of our customers are actually American companies trying to better serve local markets, the U.S. Hispanic market, the French Canadian market, for example, which is going after their primary market, but only doing it in their preferred language, right? So, people that live in Texas that speak Spanish, or people that live in Chicago that speak Spanish, might want to buy or transact or do research in their preferred language. That doesn't mean they don't know English, but it's all about the customer experience. That's something that I learned right away that I thought was fascinating. And over my time here, I think, it's going to sound like what everybody else is probably talking about, but AI, I think translation in and of itself has always been an industry that was very susceptible to being disrupted by AI. To its core, machine learning, which is what renders very good AI models and large language models, is getting a lot of inputs from translations that people have done in the past. So if you translate, I want to eat an apple, to quiero comer una manzana, and you do that 100,000 times, the machine translation, the AI model is pretty high confidence that that's how you translate that exact sentence. In our industry, we say segment. But what's been fascinating to me to learn is how fast, the AI is getting closer and closer to human quality translation. But to be more nuanced, it's not quite there, especially when we talk about things like, I don't know, aphorisms and idioms and sayings like, The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? Like how you translate that with a large language model, you might have to, depending on what localized market you're talking to, you might say something else. And in Mexico we say that tal palo tal astilla, which means from kind of roughly from the same stick, the same splinter. It means the same, but it's AI can't quite do that translation.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely not a direct word-for-word translation, because you have to understand the meaning behind the phrase and why it's being used in the context of the sentence to do the correct piece.
Yeah, and then the next part from that is, depending on how sensitive your industry is to translation quality, you might want to pick different machine translation models. So, for example, there are models that are better trained for medical translation or, engineering type translation or financial services type translation, where they're more nuanced and localized when speaking about, a legal term or a medical term from one language to another. But it's not only the other language, right? It's also like the way that they say it in the market that you're targeting, right? In Spain, they might say automóvil, and in Mexico, they'll say coche. Not really, but as an example. And those are, what's the word? Like, I'm messing over here, but it's like different word, but same meaning, right?
Right. Yeah.
Synonyms.
Yeah. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think you're right. It's more than just the language; it's also the localization. And I've had a media background and been working in media for more than a decade now. And we were talking about, like, you take a film that's filmed in the United States and you want to translate into a different language to, send out, maybe say, oh, we'll do it in Spanish and then we'll send it to Mexico and Argentina. And no, you have to think about where it's going to go for that localization and get it translated for that specific, geographical region, so that you get all those pieces that you're talking about that's in there. How soon do you think AI will be able to tackle some of those problems and machine learning really be able to nail down that localization parts that you're talking about that are kind of missing today?
Yeah, well, that's the thing with AI. I like the kind of the metaphor of more people made money selling shovels than finding gold, right? In the gold rush. And that's right now. There's a gold rush in AI, and the people that are going to come out of it, we don't quite know exactly, right? The .com boom, a couple of in the early 2000s, similar. So we don't know who the winners are going to be, but AI can advance so fast and yet go into such a nook and niche that it's hard for me to tell, right? But I will say that I think in the next couple of years we will see localizations to that level. But it all comes down to how much data points are collected. So I'll give you an example, which is fascinating too. Is, don't quote me, but I'm pretty confident the language pair that gets translated the most into is English to Spanish. So if you use machine translation, Google Translate to translate something from English to Spanish, you're going to get a pretty high translation quality from that. Now, if you do the exact same translation from English to Polish, it won't be as good, even if it's the same exact translation engine. And the reason is not because the engine or Google Translate is bad. It's just that, like we mentioned before, the data points that it's learned from Spanish, because it's have so much data from that, make it much more accurate. But the same engine, since not that much has been done and not how much has been documented and machine learned by the language pair English to Polish, the same engine is going to render much less translation quality into Polish. So I think you'll start seeing localization be very effective when it comes to, let's say, the American to Spanish to Mexican market, or the American to the U.S. Hispanic market. I think you'll see that first, but it's always going to come down to how many times have people, done something so that the AI can have a very high confidence on an output on what it renders.
So basically, we have to use it more to get it better.
And then we have to feed it to the machine so that it develops confidence and, like, this is how it's done, and it can do it. So it's magic. It's crazy what it's capable of doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we've kind of struggled with is, and maybe it's a question that you can help answer, is what is good enough? Because you hear that some things are good enough, and I've gone to we just got back from a family European trip. We went to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, and all over the place, and Sweden, Norway. While we're at these places, we would do our research. We'd go to websites, and obviously the websites weren't in English, but you had a little translate button at the top, and we would translate it. And sometimes it was very good translation, and other times it was like I still didn't even know like where to buy tickets.
Yeah. Or you saw a little bit of content that was still in the other language and not quite.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially like if it was over an image. They didn't change the images out. So the images still had the other language, but there was some text that kind of, hopefully the alt tags were changed correctly so you could kind of figure it out.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And, it's something that, shamelessly, I guess I'll mention it because that's right up what MotionPoint accomplishes and does is what's good enough? Well, 75% of the people that come to MotionPoint actually have never translated a website before. So they're not really familiar into what to look for, what's good enough, what's best, what's the best approach for them specifically. And we offer a very consultative approach where we need to understand, one of the questions we like kind of talking through is, what's your critical conversion path? There's three types of websites, John. It's either informational, they're trying to generate a lead, like a form completion, or transactional, right? They're buying something or they're booking something on the website. Now, for all three of those, every website will have specific conversion paths or critical conversion paths. And especially if it's a transactional website, we want to make sure that those pages and those paths have high translation quality. The cool thing about our technology and technology for website translation in general, but specific to MotionPoint, is the translation flexibility. So you can make sure that those types of paths, pages that are most sensitive to translation quality, have the highest level of translation quality. So, you could use machine translation and then have a human being edit it, or just have a human being translate it from the get-go without any, AI or machine translation in the middle. So it really depends on what the critical conversion paths are for a website. But like you said, images and videos, these are assets that, unless the text, is embedded in the on the image, and not that the image has text in and of itself, right? Where because we work like a crawler, like Google, and if we see that there's content on the image, because let's say someone put a little text box on top of the image, and that's how that's there, it'll translate it very easily. Even Google Translate could do that. But detecting that there's an image that needs to be translated because it has words on it is something that MotionPoint is able to do, but it can't do it on the fly. It'll take us like a business day to basically re-engineer that image and translate it into whatever language you want it to be. So there's levels to the types of services that you can find in terms of website translation. And what's good enough? Well, just to answer a question, you have to tell your service provider or the way that you're solving this, your translator, what matters to you the most, so that you can both save costs, right? And you don't have to translate in many cases, like your career section. If you're an American company, like the career section, trying to hire somebody in the USA, maybe you want them to speak English, right? So you're not going to translate that. And you should have, the ability to, in the Spanish version of that site, not even have the careers page show up if you don't want it to be, right? So that the experience is, has integrity, and it's designed for the consumer. Because there's nothing worse than, going into a website, trying to see it, and you can imagine if that when you translated the website and you saw those pieces of partial translation where it didn't get translated into English, you're like, well, this is definitely not made for me. And right. You alienate your customer and your visitors, and then they'll probably go with someone else on, is showcasing that they care a little bit more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one place we went to in Poland, and we almost didn't go because the website was so difficult and it wasn't translated in English at all. So I had to use Google Translate to kind of manually go back and forth and figure out what I was looking at. And we almost didn't go to this place. I'm glad we did because it was a lot of fun. It was really great once we got there. And when we got there, everybody there spoke English. So it wasn't like, a big deal, but they just didn't put the time and effort into making the website appealing for visitors that weren't, from Poland.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It happens in other ways too. Like, they'll have a call center, call it 1-800 whatever to speak in Spanish, for example. And you'll find that those call centers are saturated with people calling in and asking questions, and that comes to, in many cases, a big cost to the business, right? And if they just translated their website accurately, those numbers would completely go down, and you wouldn't be having to do that as much, right? So, especially when you have a nice product to offer, like your example is great. You're very glad you went. Even when you went, people spoke English. It was nice. It was a great time, and you almost didn't go because it was such a hard, it's a hard thing to even figure out the information that you needed to purchase and enjoy it, and that's literally what we're trying to solve over here at MotionPoint. But that's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming back from this trip, I've got so many examples that are running through my head of hotels and places like that we stayed at that were just difficult. Yet, I would send an email because, and just to your point, I didn't call because international calls and stuff like that. But I sent an email, and they would respond in English and answer my questions. But it was probably on the website; it just wasn't translated properly or left off, from the localization piece.
Yeah, and that took someone's time and effort to manually go through it. How many times will that happen to them, right? So, it's just it's interesting, but I don't know if it's a catch-22, but it's like people will not think about the translated experiences as much as they will their English experience, if that's their flagship website is in English, or Estonian, just because they don't speak that language. And it's hard to empathize, with someone that when you don't understand, how that can be like, so I guess you can feel a lot like of that you just can't get through. Like, I want to say like impotent, like you can't really, get what you want to do done. Yeah. So that's, I think those are good examples, actually.
I was getting ready to say, it's kind of, it is all about empathy, right? And that's one of the things as leaders that we have to kind of, exercise that empathy muscle when we're leading others to realize the experiences that they're having, and to relate to them. And I'm guessing that's one of the things that maybe makes you so good at your job is that you have that experience by growing up in Mexico and coming to America. You can kind of see both examples and understand a little bit better that may help you empathize with others. Do you ever get to use that empathy skill when you're leading others on your team?
Yeah, of course. I think, the most famous book in the world, like, mentions that if you really want to be like the number one, the leader, like, you have to be a slave to your people, and that's really true because a leader isn't the person that gets served, right? A leader is not really a king, but a leader is actually the lowest servant. You're supposed to help and connect, because they're the people that work for me. They're just so brilliant and high honor, high class people. They use words that people don't use anymore, and say the same about the whole company. It's full of people that really care. Yeah. And I found out that, especially when I started realizing that I don't have to know everything, or I don't have to keep information from people, just because I might be worried about, them taking my job. And that's something that I learned, obviously, I shouldn't do when I was much younger than now. But, sometimes you want to hold information from your team or because you see them as a threat, even when they're your peers. And I think that was just a younger version of myself. But I remember when I learned, no, it's the opposite. Like, do not keep silos. Try to make sure that you're. I like the example of a seesaw. Like, you want to be the fulcrum. The fulcrum is the middle of the seesaw. When something comes across it, like, you just transfer it effortlessly. And I think that's what a leader is. It's a fulcrum. It's someone that's right there in the middle, helping balance one side to the other. And I think that that's my biggest trait as a professional that I've learned, is using empathy to understand that what I'm trying to convey and share is just to increase the effectiveness of the team, right? And make sure that they know what they have to do and why they have to do it. And especially the why, John.
Yeah.
I'm dropping a lot of quotes here, but I don't know if you know that the writer of The Little Prince, Saint-Exupéry, I think is his name. He has a quote where it's, if you want to ask the men to build a boat, you don't drum them up and ask them to go chop up the wood and craft it into these, refined, pieces, planks to build it. You actually, what you have to do is teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And if you can teach them why they need to do it, the boat will be built by itself. And I think that's really like cutting to it. You really want to cut to people. Why am I doing this? So you ask them to do a task and they do it, but they don't understand what comes on the other end of that. They probably, because I did, you'd feel a little marginalized. You don't feel like you're a part of it, especially at MotionPoint, we're a technology company, and like many technology companies, we do work from home a lot, and you don't want people feeling that they're alone. We want to be a team, and we're competing against teams. So information transfer and using that empathy to make sure people are aligned with why they're trying to do something, I think is the most powerful thing to leading a good team. Absolutely. That's a great. Thank you, John.
Yeah, and Start With Why is a book by Simon Sinek that I absolutely love. Yeah. And I can go back to when I was an early leader and I was managing a web and mobile development team for a company. And our company had like service techs that would go out and like solve problems and fix like, people's issues with their home and stuff like that. And I remember I was a manager and I was like, well, I'm going to, I just read this book, Start With Why, and I was all motivated and pumped up. And I'm like, all right, our next, project or task or whatever it comes in for our teams to work on, our next feature enhancement, it's going to be, I want to, show my team that we're going to start with why. We're going to figure out the why behind this thing. And I was all excited. And the request that came in was, we want to move the button on our close form from the bottom of the ticket to the top of the ticket. I'm like, what the heck? This is so stupid. But I said, nope, I'm going to do it. So I went and I asked I met with the person that submitted the request and asked them, well, why do you want to do this? They're like, oh, it's just easier. I'm like, yeah, but why? Why is it easier? Mm-hmm. And then they explained the process. And at the time, we assumed, based off of all of our requirements gathering and things like that we had done, this is, 15 years ago or more.
Yeah.
That the tickets were received, in a certain order. The technician went out to the house, they worked on the ticket, they put in their notes, and they closed the ticket. And then they got their next ticket and went that house and did so on and so forth. But it turns out that's not how they operate. What they did is they would get their tickets, they would make their notes, but they would save it. They wouldn't actually close the ticket. And they would wait till the end of the day when they're getting ready to get off work. And they would open up each one of those tickets. Maybe they had 10 or 12 tickets from the day. And they would close each one of them, one at a time.
Yeah.
And we were like, why do they do that? They said, well, they do that because if, they went to a house and they thought they fixed the problem and they left and then the customer called them back, they had to go back to that house and they already closed the ticket. There was no way to reopen it. They had to create a new ticket. It just became a big hassle. So it's like, oh, well, we can make this so much easier for you. So what we ended up doing is, for starters, we let them reopen tickets that were previously closed, if they were closed within the last 24 hours. So that was a feature that we got out of that by just asking, why, and doing that part. And then we were able to also say, well, instead of open each ticket and close them at the end of the day, why don't we just give a mass close button or like a select all and close all? Yeah. You could uncheck the one or two that you don't want to close. And it was a very simple request. And then I was able to take the information that I gathered and go to my team and inspire them by telling them a story and saying, hey, we're doing this not just to make things easier for a technician, but it's at the end of the day. When this technician wants to leave work and go eat dinner with his family, he wants to play soccer with his kids. And instead of making him spend an extra 10 minutes at work closing tickets, we can speed up that and get him home 10 minutes faster to spend time with his family. And,
yeah, I love that.
And all just by starting with why.
Yeah. Here at MotionPoint, one of our our isms is don't walk the plank. It's when somebody tells you to do something, challenge it if you think that you need to challenge it. And I very much love that because I'm the first to be challenging, a little bit too much sometimes. But if I don't understand why something's being asked, it's hard for me to ask the team to do it too, you know? Well, it's because I said so. Well, that's pretty weak. They're not going to do a good job. So that's a brilliant story, you know, and by asking why, you end up creating so much more efficiencies than what they originally asked you. So that's a great example of the domino effect of leading with empathy, right? And leading with why, I think, and leading with empathy, pretty much the same thing. It's a nice curiosity, you know, that you want to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Don't walk the plank. It's very similar to one that we have called challenge all assumptions, where you know, because there's so many times where I've come, you know, I started a new position not too long ago and asked the team, like, I noticed they were creating this report, and I kept getting this report in my email, and I'm like, what is the purpose of this report? Because I don't understand it. And I had someone try to explain it to me. It didn't make any sense to me. And I was like, okay, well, who reads this? And I'm like, well, here's the list of everybody that gets it. So I went and I asked every single person on the list, and not a single one of them like looked at it at all. And I'm like, well, how long have you been making this report? I'm like, oh, for 8 years. And I said, okay. And apparently, after drilling back in, it turns out that one person asked for this information for a one-time affair, and they decided to create a report out of it, and then they generated this report every week. And it takes the person that's generating it more than an hour a week to generate this report. And they've been doing it for 8 years, and they only needed it that one time, and it's never been used again. And I'm like, stop doing it. Just stop.
That is crazy. I think that happens in every organization, because I have I could say the exact same to the T, the exact same story that has happened here. You know. Yeah, but that's great. Like,
okay, so challenge those assumptions, right? Don't walk the plank.
Exactly. Don't walk the plank. Don't walk it.
Yeah, Dominic, it's been a great conversation. I really appreciate having you on. If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about how they can connect with you online, learn more about MotionPoint, the things that you guys are doing, and you know, just get connected.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you guys can reach me on LinkedIn at Dominic Dithurbide, and at MotionPoint, one word, MotionPoint. We're, you know, the leading technology platform for website translation. We do concierge-level services. Basically, we'll do it for you, especially when it's the first time you've ever done a translation project in the past. You might not know exactly what you're looking for, what you need, and we take a consultative approach. So we'll let you know exactly the best way for your business and your business objectives to translate, and what path to take. And we just there, MotionPoint.com, and me personally, Dominic Dithurbide on LinkedIn. And it's been an absolute pleasure, John. A great conversation, and I look forward to hear the recording. I hope you have a great weekend and a good rest of your day.
Yeah, awesome. And I'll link all that in the show notes too, to geekleader.com, so people can click through and connect with you that way. Again, thanks so much.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to. Click on their links and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.